Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Simon Hamilton. I'm the Chief Executive of Belfast Chamber, and you're all very welcome to this afternoon's event, which is the launch of the Belfast Business Survey and the results from that survey. We're very pleased to be able to partner with Belfast City Council in the delivery of the survey. Later on, we're going to hear from David Chong-Ping from MEL Research, who's going to give us an overview of the survey results. We'll also do some analysis of the results along with Karen Bonner, who is a senior economist in the Economic Policy Centre at Ulster University. But as I mentioned, we at Belfast Chamber are very, very pleased to deliver this survey in partnership with Belfast City Council. I'm just going to introduce John Greer, who is the Director of Economic Development at Belfast City Council, to say a word of welcome and also to explain why the Council and Belfast Chamber have come together to produce the Belfast Business Survey. John, over to you.
Thanks, Simon. Well, first, I'd just like to thank everybody for attending today, and thanks, Simon, for all his help in putting together this survey and promoting this survey. And of course, thanks to Karen for the hard work. It's very important that we continue to drive the economic ambitions of the city forward. And we consider this survey to be a key tool in how we do that. As a council, we want to understand the experiences that businesses are having in the city so that we can better educate how we can assist businesses to start, grow and prosper in our city, and even to come and reside in our city. So we see this as a key tool in doing that. It is important to mention that this is a longitudinal survey, so we will be doing this because we want to understand how we're adding value to the business community in Belfast, and that's a conversation that we want to be part of. And in line with that, my colleague Kieran is on the call today, and Kieran would welcome any questions, comments or suggestions you have for how we may better support business. So I'd encourage you all to speak to Kieran, exchange ideas with Kieran, and Kieran will be happy to do that on the call and outside of the call. But again, thank you to everybody for their time today. Thank you to Simon and Karen and David for their assistance in the survey. I think the results, given the very difficult time businesses had in the last 2 months, are showing signs of optimism, but ultimately that optimism will need to be supported, and that is the role that Belfast City Council wish to play in the future going forward. So again, thank you all.
Thank you, John, and again, thank you for partnering with Belfast Chamber to deliver Belfast Business Survey. So we're going to get to the main event, which is the revealing of the survey results. So all the hard work in gathering together this data was done by David Chong-Ping, who is also joined today by Claire Rapkins from MEL Research. I'm going to hand over to David to go through the key findings from the survey. As John mentioned, there's an opportunity to ask some questions later. There's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If that's anything that David says that you want to ask directly to him or to Claire, or indeed you want to share your observations, or as John mentioned, pick up around some of the support that the Belfast City Council could provide your business, please feel free to do so in that Q&A box. So David, I'm going to hand over to you, and we're looking forward to seeing the survey finding.
Super, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. And a huge thank you to all of the businesses that obviously took part in the survey. As mentioned, it is a longitudinal survey, and the plan is to try and capture business sentiment every 6 months to see how things are changing, how support measures, etc., are impacting on businesses, and hopefully helping them to grow. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So the survey itself ran over the summer period, and we had 400 businesses who participated. We asked generally some questions to understand what markets they were operating in, and obviously businesses can trade in more than one market, but you can see internationally we've got just over 2/5 of businesses that are trading internationally. So that exporting opportunity clearly is a big driver. For those operating in Northern Ireland and UK markets, 1/3 are there, and from Belfast only, so solely in Belfast, a quarter of the sample, 100 businesses roughly, participated. As to be expected, when we're looking at the data, we want to make sure that we've got a more representative sample. So the sample was weighted to sort of make it representative of businesses in Belfast, but from pure participation, it was 63% of those with 9 or less employees, 26%, just over a quarter, that had between 10 and 49 employees, and then 11% that had 50 or more employees. And we have a wide range of business sectors that were also participating in this. We put measures in place to try and make sure that we targeted specific business sectors to get views. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So in the survey, we're trying to understand how trading has affected businesses in the past 6 months. And here we've got sales, and we asked people how their sales may have been, looking at those particular markets, whether it was in Northern Ireland, Belfast and the rest of the UK, whether it was in Ireland itself, those that also trade in the wider EU marketplace, and then other overseas markets. And you can see quite clearly that for the Belfast, Northern Ireland and the rest of UK market, views are sort of split, with just over 2/5 saying that their turnover had increased, but also 2/5 suggesting that turnover had decreased in that 6-month period. Perhaps more promisingly, those trading overseas in markets outside of the EU saw greater increases in sales. So almost half indicating they'd seen increases in sales in the previous 6 months in non-EU overseas markets. Next slide, please. And when we then ask a question around optimism for the future, we ask a question around what people believe sales will be like in the coming 6 months. And you can see there, I won't go through all of those, you can see them on screen, but you can see there that in each of the markets where people are operating, optimism is very high, with well over half and over 2/3 in other overseas non-EU markets, indicating that their belief that sales will be picking up and trading will be improving in the coming 6 months. Next slide, please. Clearly, sales is one area of optimism or areas to measure. The profitability is another. And again, we can see a mixed picture here, where actually in the main, profitability has gone down in the past 6 months in all of the markets, except for those other overseas markets outside of the EU, where it just 1/3 suggesting an increase, 3 in 10 suggesting a decrease. You can see the difference there in the domestic markets there, with Belfast, Northern Ireland, rest of the UK, over 2/5 highlighting the challenges of a competitive marketplace, but also potentially rising costs, etc. And we'll look at that on some of the other slides. Again, we then asked what the view was in the coming 6 months, what people thought the likelihood would be for profitability. Next slide, please. And you can see here, again, that optimism is starting to come through, of not only sales having belief that sales will pick up, but also that profitability will actually bounce back compared to the previous 6 months. Specifically over other overseas markets outside of the EU, much more confidence in that particular marketplace, recognising there's a fewer businesses. The end numbers there indicate that the number of businesses, that's just 58. Next slide, please. So we asked a question around whether or not people thought that the business will improve in the coming months. And what we have here is that just over half of businesses believe that economic will be better for their own business in the coming months. And when looking at the business sector that they operate in, actually that falls to just below half, with 1/5 suggesting that they feel it might get worse for their sector. For the Belfast economy, just under 1/2 suggests that they think it will get better, and almost 3 in 10 thinking it will get worse. There are some differences in the data, and optimism within the accommodation sector and food services sector. It does come out there that expecting things to get worse for their own business is 52%. And so those knock-on effects that we've seen for long periods for the hospitality and retail sectors in particular certainly is coming through in the data, with that still being a case of economic prospects not really seeing an uplift immediately. Next slide, please. We asked a question about the impact of the UK's exit from the EU, and you can see here quite clearly the majority of businesses believe that they will be worse off as a result of the exit. The top 3 issues for businesses: paperwork, bureaucracy, red tape came top, 36%. Transportation costs, 3 in 10 believe that would be a barrier for their growth, and custom duties or levies, and certainly for those trading internationally, that's obviously another key barrier to that the UK's EU exit has brought about. One of the key areas that came out of the survey, and it's seen elsewhere as well, is staffing and skills, and this is clearly a key driver for growth, but also a key barrier. Changes in staffing, as you can see there, is broadly the same for the majority. 57% believe that over the last 6 months they've kept the same team. However, over a fifth have seen increases in staffing, but also a fifth has seen decreases in staffing as a result in the last 6 months. In terms of optimism for the future, it shows that actually over a third of businesses are looking to hire staff, are looking to take those staff on. Next slide, please. Whilst we've got a range of businesses that are keen to take on staff and also develop their existing staff, there exists some challenges for staff and recruitment. From a pre-coded list, so this is a list of options that people could choose, we've asked them what extra support they might need in training in the future. And IT and digital skills is by far the highest gap that businesses have, with over 2/5 indicating that is definitely a training need within their business. Sector-specific, job-specific skills also features quite highly, indicating some challenges around the types of skills that prospective candidates have, or rather the existing workforce also may need training on. And commercial skills is another key area there, with a third indicating they're keen to have their workforce be more commercial in how they approach their tasks. You can see all of those there. You can see that at the bottom, actually, 17% of businesses believe that most of their staff have all of these skills already and don't feel any of those are necessary for their business moving forward at the current point in time. Next slide, please. Businesses were provided, again, with a list of business-related costs and asked to confirm whether any of them had increased, reduced, or stayed the same in the last 6 months. And you can see here the challenges to businesses. Here, almost 3/4 highlighting challenges for raw materials, and more widely, 2/3 are having challenges with suppliers and services to their business. Others around transportation, logistics. Clearly all increasing costs to the business. For those increased costs, 63% are passing on some of those costs to the business, to customers, but others are actually absorbing those costs in total. So 1/5 absorbing all of those additional costs themselves, and 16% are actually passing on all of the costs directly to customers. Next slide, please. We asked businesses what they felt the challenges were moving forwards, and what you can see here is that in terms of business debt, almost 2/5 have seen an increase, and we will obviously be aware of the measures put in place to try and support businesses through the pandemic period, through loans, through business rates relief, etc., or delays, through furlough schemes, etc. But this is obviously clearly having an impact where almost 2/5 are seeing that as an increase in business debt. As far as challenges go, we mentioned earlier that staffing and skills are a key part of business and business productivity. Staff recruitment comes out as the #1 challenge for businesses in the future. We then have lack of customers and footfall, again, through lockdown periods. Clearly that has affected some business sectors more than others. Retail, hospitality, clearly are higher than that 1/3 figure. But for those 400 businesses we talked to, 131 are indicating a need for more customers. Again, logistics, supply chain, getting hold of stock is also still a challenging part for businesses, as is competition and losing out opportunities to competitors. And finally, ongoing issues with being paid on time is affecting around 1/5 of businesses. Sorry, 1/4 of businesses, 26% there, are still being challenged by cash flow issues. Next slide, please. We asked businesses whether they had any barriers for growth, and what you can see here is demand for sales, and really around finding those customers, getting to customers. That is the greatest barrier for the vast majority of business there, 54% indicating the level of demand. Again, some of this is linked to lockdowns and other trading challenges there. Staff, again, comes out as a key area. So not only professional staff there, with 3 in 10 businesses indicating that they need more skilled staff, but other suitable staff is also affecting a 1/4 of businesses too. Similarly, around 1/4 having cash flow issues linked to the previous slide as well. And then in the domestic market, 23% indicating a challenge of just competition, having to trade against others locally. And next slide, please. Perhaps not surprisingly then, when asked about what business support might help them increase sales over the next 12 months, the most frequently response was making sure the staff had the right skills, and just over 1/4 there indicating that's a key need for the business in order to increase their sales and profitability. However, just over 1/5 also need or would like marketing support, and a further 1/5 around recruiting the staff. Clearly, this was asked a while ago over the summer. We would expect that if we were to do this survey again, as we mentioned, it's a tracking survey, no doubt this number here, with all the news that we've seen recently, may well have increased from that 1/5% for recruitment. Health and wellbeing is clearly also on the radar of businesses, with around 1/5 indicating support needs for that. And similarly, business expansion, where businesses are doing well, potentially including overseas trade, around 1/5 keen to get support there too. We again provided a list of potential details for businesses about whether they were planning to alter location in the next 12 months. And over half of businesses were not planning to make any changes, 53% there making no changes at all. So, but for 47% of businesses, they were clearly looking to make some form of adaptations to their business. The most common one at the top there is reusing floor space, looking at refurbishing and making sure that extending their floor space to capitalise obviously on opportunities. What 6% there you can see also we're looking to sell the business, so mergers and acquisitions is clearly still on the cards for some, as is starting new business. We also have some others there, around 6%, about reducing floor space. I won't read all of those out, you can obviously see them, but the headline figure there is that 47% of businesses are looking to adapt and change their business location and plans in the coming 12 months. Next slide, please. Again, from a list of possible issues, businesses are asked whether or not they were a major problem, minor problem, or not a problem at all. And you can see here that street cleanliness is split. 50% believing it's a problem and 50% not seeing it as an issue at all. Perhaps the ones that are more critical is car parking. Over half there, so a majority indicating that they believe that car parking is an issue which is affecting their business. Similarly, around 49% highlighting antisocial behaviour as a particular challenge in their locality. And linked to that antisocial behaviour, you can see the following on people damaging properties, so vandalism, etc., around 2/5 there, seeing that as a problem. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, in summary, really what we've seen is that the COVID-19 outbreak, EU exit, has had an impact on turnover and profit levels, with people reporting lower than expected profit levels in most of their markets, apart from those export markets outside of the EU in the last 6 months. But looking to the future in the next 6 months, and again, we will be testing this to see how that tracks. There is much more business optimism in terms of turnover, profitability, and more generic economic prospects, not just for the business themselves, also their sector and the Belfast economy too. Most are happy with their current office premises and not planning to make changes, but there are some there. The main concerns are around EU exit. If you recall, 51% feel they will be impacted by that, increased costs and costs of materials, rising debt levels, and staff and recruitment difficulties. So that's a whistle-stop tour through the survey results, and then I know they are available. I'm going to hand back to Simon now to follow up on that. Thank you.
David, thank you for that. Some fascinating results. So there's quite a few, and it's one of those surveys where some of the answers you want to ask another survey's worth of questions just to drill into them a bit further. So what we are going to do is try to explore a few of the kind of main themes and most important themes that come through. I'm going to reintroduce Karen Bonner, who Karen's a senior economist in the Policy Centre at Ulster University. I know, Karen, you're very welcome. David and Claire from MEL are also about, as is Kieran Higgins from Belfast City Council. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop them into that Q&A box. But Karen, a few people have mentioned, David and John mentioned as well, that the context of the survey, which is a period, an interesting period, shall I put it like that, where businesses were starting to get back. Many who had been closed for a considerable amount of time have started to reopen again. So there is a sense of, it's not overwhelming sense of optimism, but there are some things that are coming through which would suggest that people are optimistic about the situation getting better. So, 54% believe that they will get, their business is going to get better. Interestingly, more people think that Belfast economy will do worse than their business. And David explored those turnover and profitability, where there's a majority on turnover who are optimistic about increasing that. And in profitability terms, there's a reasonable levels of an expectation that it will increase. So, are you seeing a similar sort of sense of optimism coming through in the survey after what has been a very difficult period for many of the businesses that have been surveyed?
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think the context in this is the key point. When your survey was done, June or July, August, at that point, businesses had sort of a year of really turbulent and really challenging times. I guess in the first half of 2021, when we saw the vaccine rollout enabling some of the restrictions to ease, that gave a sense of confidence for businesses that they'd, particularly for those that had to close and couldn't find a different way to offer their products and services. They were obviously able to be more optimistic about what the second half of the year would bring in terms of getting back to not quite normal operations, but certainly getting open again, getting back to trading. I thought the findings around the turnover for the first 6 months or the previous 6 months was quite interesting. David picked up there that for those selling locally and in the UK market, it was 40% had seen their turnover increase, but 40% had seen their turnover decrease. And I think that was really reflective of the sort of different experiences of the pandemic by different sectors. So certainly hospitality, which he picked up on, really had a really difficult and challenging time throughout. Whereas other sectors like professional services, who were able to more easily transition to working from home and keeping their business operations going. They were able to report turnover increases, but the likes of hospitality, very much it was turnover decreases for them. So I think the overall picture kind of gave you a sense that there's beneath that level, there's very different experiences there. But it was good that the businesses were optimistic about the second half of the year.
Yeah, and I think that gives us some sense of hope. But you're right. That's, I think, an interesting point around. It's something that we've seen quite a lot. Where there are a lot of businesses, obviously, who have had a torrid time, I think is the nicest way to put it. There are others who have done quite well. So the growth in sales in overseas markets is an interesting figure as well. We're not historically that great at trading. We have some very, very good examples, but we do tend to sell the local market to south of the border across the GB. We're not, but that overseas market was perhaps a sort of a many businesses seizing an opportunity that the last year presented with difficulties in supply chains in other locations. And again, it's one of those things that we'd love to drill into a little bit more. But again, some cause for optimism that people are looking beyond Northern Ireland, beyond sort of traditional markets to sell into.
Yeah, and I thought that was actually quite interesting, given that the pandemic was a worldwide pandemic. So the fact that they were still able to sell into other markets, which themselves would have been dealing with the pandemic, that was really encouraging. Again, it was probably reflective of specific types of goods or services being sold into those markets. And as you said, yes, we've a relatively small number of exporters. So the fact that they were able, to do relatively well, is I guess encouraging to others who would maybe seek to export in the future. It's when local demand is down, there are other opportunities out there. I thought that was an interesting result, actually. As I said, given the worldwide context of the pandemic.
And not wishing to sort of rain on the optimistic parade, there are clearly a couple of areas where there are, potential inhibitors to growth. Whilst one would expect, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I say this after the huge dip in the economic output over the pandemic, we would expect to rebound reasonably strongly out of all of that. But there are undoubtedly teething problems, and there's a couple of them that come through very, very strongly. One of them, I'll come on to the other in a minute or two. The one that really shines through is staff recruitment. So we've all heard, we've certainly seen it in Belfast Chamber, others have heard it sort of anecdotally, or it's been in the press around difficulties in getting staff. And 38% say biggest challenge, and that was the most selected answer. 34% were hiring, hoping to hire staff in the next 6 months, which was a good thing, but obviously they were seeing some difficulties that, and 57% had experienced recruitment difficulties in the last 2 years. So with so many wanting to hire versus, actually redundancies was down at 6%. So kind of not as bad perhaps as we might have feared at the time, but with 57% having recruitment difficulties and 38% saying that was the biggest challenge. And then when we were asking about support needs, improving staff skills was the top one. I think the third was helping recruiting came through. So this is clearly, it's much more than an anecdote or the talk of the town. There's some concrete evidence here to suggest that staffing is a problem at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. As you said, that did come out really clearly across, as you said, the challenges and the barriers to growth and the what businesses need support with. And I thought, you mentioned there about the 57% saying that they'd had recruitment difficulties in the last 2 years. So I thought that in itself told a story, even pre-pandemic, that there's an underlying issue around recruitment and skills in Belfast and again more widely in Northern Ireland. There seems to be a mismatch between the skills that companies need and the supply that's out there in terms of the general population. Yes, the pandemic has definitely accelerated this again for some sectors more than others. I know when I looked more detail at your results, again, it was hospitality, it was wholesale and retail who were experiencing recruitment difficulties. But then In terms of some of the challenges, professional services were also mentioned, difficulties getting suitably qualified staff. So it's right across, it's all sectors. It's not sort of just one or two. And yes, a more fundamental issue, as I said, if it's going back 2 years, and I guess the key thing is how do we address that? So, there's, I guess, potential for remote working to maybe solve some of that, but it doesn't get away from the fact that if this is a long-standing issue, we maybe, we need a long-term solution to this, not just a one-off trying to patch up the difficulties. And I thought as well, what was interesting was the question around which skills are businesses looking for, or which in terms of their own workforce. Again, it was across a range. It wasn't just, well, IT and digital skills came out top, which I guess, given the move to remote working and the IT solutions to a lot of what has happened, it's no surprise that businesses are looking for IT skills, but it was also, there were more job specific skills, it was commercial skills, it was management and leadership. So it was right across the range of different skills that companies are seeking. And, as you said, yes, this is coming up as a barrier to growth. So this is something that does need addressed.
Yeah, I think a very good point too, that it whilst the sectors hit the hardest are feeling the biggest impact, it is an across the board problem. Another one is another inhibitor or barrier is clearly around cost. So I think it was pretty much everything, raw materials, supplies and services, transportation were all up. The only ones that were broadly the same were legal costs, rent, which will be a backstory, pandemic related backstory to, and advertising. Everything else was up quite considerably. A lot of businesses trying to absorb that. That can only arguably remain for a while, but a significant amount of those being passed on, which is going to impact on demand. It's going to see people, a lot of clear evidence with inflation numbers up last week and up quite considerably, that we're in for a difficult period in terms of costs. And as we've seen lots of stories this week about energy prices, and so cost, staffing and costs clearly are the two big barriers to the rebounding out of this period in a stronger way as we would have maybe hoped.
Yeah, and again, the fact that costs are up across those different range of factors. It wasn't just fuel costs, it was, transport, it was insurance, it was labour costs, it was right across the board. And for businesses that we're still not in a proper recovery phase, a lot of business activities have yet to open. A lot of them are still operating under social distancing restrictions. So for businesses to not have recovered and now be facing with these increased costs right across, that is challenging. You've also then, as you've mentioned, the last couple of days, a lot of talk of increased energy costs and gas and electricity and so on. And you're right, that does get passed. That impacts down the supply chain. It impacts consumers, and consumers themselves will face increased energy bills. So that will impact on their demand and consumption, which again impacts businesses. So, there's wider knock-on effects from these increased costs right across the economy. And for businesses, as I said, that are maybe still struggling to have to, bear those costs. And you're right, even those that have absorbed them to date, there'll be a limit as to how long they can continue to absorb costs before they do have to pass the majority of those on. And I think just to even looking sort of the short term and then into next year, we have the ending of the furlough scheme. And although a lot, only 6% of businesses in the survey said they plan to make redundancies, if that does mean that those who have staff on furlough are bringing them back, then those additional employee costs have to be counted. Then next year, the national insurance contribution increases. So, I think for the rest of this year and into spring next year, I think these costs will become a more dominant issue. And again, like a real barrier to recovery, never mind to growth beyond that.
And we mentioned the context is very much like emerging from a pandemic, and you can see there's interesting that around, some businesses, and it's only a few wanting to kind of move online. There isn't sort of mass exodus from the city either. At one stage we were told, as Belfast was finished and cities across the globe were finished. There's not really a sense of that, a bit of movement around the edges. But maybe the big area where I thought that there was a significant impact was around IT investment and business model diversify or change, or diversifying how people operate, changing how they operate. So see a big increase. Our biggest area of support and training required is around IT and digital skills. So there's that sense of people wanting to, everybody's like a tech business now to some extent and using technology. Planned investment, had invested in IT in the last 12 months, nearly half, 49%. And then moving forward in the next 12 months, business model investment was about nearly a third of businesses. So that's kind of, there are lots of legacies of the pandemic, lots of long-term impacts, with many of which we're starting to work through. But there you're seeing businesses reacting in real time almost to challenges that they were facing by investing in, and maybe in some cases for the first time, in technology to the extent that they are. So, that's something that I thought was interesting. Is it something that, you've noticed as well, and think is something that, everybody is going to embrace technology, and particularly around changing the business model and how people operate?
Yeah, and I think you're right. A lot of that was, it was mostly reactive to the pandemic. So yes, the fact that practically overnight, so many people had to start working remotely where possible, and even those businesses where that wasn't feasible, they looked at different IT solutions in terms of how they could continue to operate, but in a different way. And even sectors such as hospitality, there's lots of examples of pubs and restaurants that are doing delivery or hampers or whatever it was to still be able to get a product or service out, albeit in a different way than they would have normally done. So yes, what I thought was actually really encouraging about that was the looking forward to the next 12 months, and the business model innovation came out as top in terms of what businesses said that they would be investing in for the next 12 months. And I thought that sort of maybe represented a more proactive approach to business model innovation. So where they'd nearly had to do it by necessity during the pandemic, that I wonder, has that been the catalyst for them to now maybe sort of embed that and, once every so often, take a look at their business operations and see how they can innovate or, do things differently. And that in itself, I think, will help, with their sort of future resilience. So if there are further shocks down the road, that they're nearly already prepared, because it's something that they've embedded, in their workplace or their mindset, as a legacy of the pandemic. So that was, I think, in your surveys going forward, if that question was to be repeated, I wonder if that we'll see that, or how that will play out in the future.
Yeah, it's an interesting one to keep an eye on. And then maybe just finally then, sort of feel almost loath to mention it, but EU exit is there's a few questions about that. And it's clear, and not for us to get into the politics in behind it all, and obviously it's a live issue in that regard, but still very, very strongly a sense of 51% of businesses surveyed thinking they'd be worse off, only 9% thinking they'd be better off, and then a huge long list of areas of concern or challenge or difficulty around additional paperwork and transport costs and duties and disruption at the border. So quite worrying aspects of it. Also, if you look, and it's hard to say a direct read across, but biggest sales decrease was in Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, again, perhaps suggesting some difficulties or reorientation. So it's clearly having whatever about the negotiations and discussions around it all. There is still that strong sense that no matter how this shakes down, businesses think they're going to be worse off. And then at the moment, or when this survey was a sense of some difficulty or disruption to business as usual.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, although we knew Brexit was going to happen, I think because a lot of how it was going to play out in practical terms was sort of very last minute. It was difficult for firms to maybe sort of be fully prepared for that because they just didn't know what was expected of them. And I think your results quite clearly show, yes, this increased paperwork, the transportation costs, the customs duties, the disruption, that in itself is another cost to businesses. It's also a time requirement and a resource requirement for businesses, but they may not just have the capacity for, because as I said, they couldn't fully prepare for it. So yeah, that's come across quite clearly, and the fact that just over half of them have said that the business will be worse off due to Brexit. I think that's still reflecting a lot of these sort of issues that have only come about when it sort of actually happened. And yes, given that there's still discussions and negotiations and whatever, that hasn't sort of fully resolved itself. So you can imagine, at least in the sort of short term, that's going to continue. And I think just the fact that Brexit and the pandemic happened, at the same time, it's just been really challenging for businesses, the last year and a half. And, the fact that this, hasn't resolved and will continue, that's, still, I can imagine that will continue. Maybe in your next survey, you'll still see issues around Brexit.
Okay. Karen, thank you very much for your thoughts. It's really appreciated and helps to bring it to life a wee bit in terms of what it means for our members and businesses across the city who've completed the survey. So thank you for your analysis. It's much appreciated. Before we wrap up, I'm going to go back to Belfast City Council to Kieran Higgins. Kieran, there's a real strong sense and desire for businesses to, looking for help. We have several questions about advice and support and assistance. And, maybe you could outline for those who are listening some of the support that Belfast City Council can offer them and how they can go about accessing that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I work in the Economic Development Unit in the council here, and specifically enterprise and business growth. So we would provide various programs for people maybe who are looking to set up a business, and become an entrepreneur. For existing businesses then who want to grow their business. And basically it's a case of people contacting us, and we'll look at because there's a number of programs and supports potentially available, and it just depends specifically in what kind of nature of business or what stage you're at. And we can come back to your response in terms of different suggestions, types of kind of programs and supports that we recommend that you partake on. Coming back to some of the specifics there, coming out of the survey, we also have an employability and skills team. So they are working on various employment academies across different sectors where there is, maybe not just skills shortages, but labor shortages. And so they work closely with businesses, with the education institutions like the colleges, to try and tailor really specific short kind of interventions or programs that will be useful, not just for the businesses, but also for the employees or people who are unemployed and want to return to the workforce. Because I think if you're looking at that, if there is like a labor and skills shortages, maybe we're not looking at necessarily the existing workforce, but maybe people who are looking to who are, let's say, economically inactive and want to come back into the workforce. And again, a couple of other specific ones. We have an EU exit mentoring program, so for designed to react to EU exit and to support businesses through the different changes that they're experiencing there. And even the furlough scheme that's ending at the end of this month, I think 30th September. So there's a program on that's available for employers and their employees if, unfortunately, maybe they maybe have to let people go or make some people redundant. I know the service said it was a small number of people, but that's an example of another program that we have available. So I think I would say I encourage people to contact us. If they want to email me, it's economicdevelopment@belfastcity.gov.uk, and maybe Simon, if you're emailing around people, the next few days following up on that, you can share the email address. I'm very happy to talk to people about the kind of different range of supports and intervention we have. And I think a crucial message as well is, we're doing this survey because we want to learn what the issues and the problems are. And it's great that so many people responded to it. I know it's kind of maybe a bit time consuming and that, but just to get that really granular detail is very useful, and it's something that I will be sharing with my colleagues across the council, whether it's on, in terms of economic programs, but also in the policies and stuff that we're designing to help businesses and ultimately, everybody in the city, because, businesses, the economy is doing well, everybody then will be able to benefit.
Thank you, Kieran. I think that's a very good point to end on to about as John mentioned earlier, this is a survey we want to repeat, so we get a pattern. If there are any patterns emerging, we see them, we can spot them, we can react, and we can just see and track how the city's economy is doing. So thank you for that, and I encourage people to avail of that support if they think we need to. It just leaves it then to me just to thank everyone, to thank David and Claire at MEL Research for the hard work that they put into making the survey a reality. And I thank Karen again for her time and taking a close look at those results and giving her thoughts on them. I particularly want to thank not just John Greer, but also Kieran and Kathy Keenan at Belfast City Council for helping to make this a reality. It was something that has been in the works for quite some time, and takes a lot of work to get it to this position. So we want to thank Kathy for her support on it, and for Kieran for all of the hard work. He put in a huge amount of work that I know he put in to make this a reality. So thank you to everyone at Belfast City Council for their contribution. Can I thank Neil at Planned Events for making Saturday run so smoothly. And can I thank everybody for attending. There's a summary of the report is now available on belfastchamber.com, so please go along there, have a look. We will also be issuing that around along with our recording of this, and please feel free to share it with anybody who you think might be interested, along with the results as well. Thank you, everybody. Take care, and I hope to see you all again very soon at another Belfast Chamber event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon, Karen.